Welcome to the Subverse. I'm your host, Susan Mathews. This is a podcast where we journey from the cosmic to the quantum, from the complexity of development to the art of resistance, from colonial histories that haunt us to reimagining futures. We return after a break to the theme of the season, fire. And in this episode, we go deeper into a subject we covered earlier on heat and inequality. In an earlier episode, we spoke with Dr. Bharat Venkat from UCLA and how colonial histories and racial theories are implicated in the unequal way in which we experience the impacts of extreme heat. In this present episode, we look specifically at how extreme heat is embroiled in caste and labor in India, literally through the lens of a truly inspirational guest. Our guest is Bhumika Saraswati, an independent photographer, journalist, and filmmaker. She started writing, filming, and publishing when she was 16. Through visual and other storytelling, informed by her realities and her caste and gender identities. As a young Dalit woman, she aims to create a body of work accessible to and inspired by people from marginalized backgrounds. In 2022, she was awarded the UNFPA-Laadli Media Awards for gender-sensitive work. And in 2023, she was awarded the Human Rights Press Awards by Human Rights Watch and the Journalism School of Arizona State University for her documentary film, Lives of Sex Workers and Their Children. I really enjoyed speaking with Bhumika about her present visual project, which focuses on women in agriculture and the impacts of heat, and which started with a story and photo of her maternal grandmother, and earlier work she had done on workers in crematoriums during COVID-19, an occupation which is surrounded by fire and heat hazards. I will not say too much more, as I would like you to listen to her yourself and be taken on this powerful journey as I was. As Bhumika says towards the end of our conversation, buckle up and get ready for what's coming. Hello, Bhumika. It's so nice to meet you and welcome to the Subverse.
Hi, Susan. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. I would like to start with the following. There is a sort of abstract idea of who is vulnerable and marginalized when it comes to the way extreme heat affects people in India. Bhumika, in your own work as a journalist and as a Dalit woman, you have taken on this task of unpacking these identities. You have also been involved in a specific project around women in agriculture, where you use the visual medium to challenge the gaze that drives mainstream stories. Can you tell us more about this work on heat and marginalization and the challenging of this gaze in your work?
So I'll be honest with you, and I'll start from the very beginning. Last year, there was intense heat wave, but this year, it broke all records. It broke so many records, and this is when we are leading our day-to-day life. We're not prepared for this. Half the population don't know what's happening, why it's happening. My maternal grandmother, she came over to our home because the heat in the village was too extreme. Perhaps my nani, like my grandmother, she can come to my mother's home and be here. But there are so many others who just cannot. So I decided to go back to our village with my nani and all the women, all the relatives that I know there. I just spent weeks there. And I realized that it's not like, for example, you and I are sitting in this room in controlled setting and having this conversation. This is such a privilege from whatever community we're from. Well, so there is an intersection which is mostly missing in most conversations. The other thing was that I was attending a lot of heat conferences in Delhi, any conference that would happen, I would go attend. As a journalist, as a filmmaker, I would observe, not report every time, just go and observe. And I was sitting in this conference and I would feel so disconnected to the conference because the conference is in a weird room where So many ACs are on, and everybody is just talking about this superficial idea of heat. It just did not sound real. And I had gone there with my photographs also, and I'm just like, people are sitting here on tables talking about the most vulnerable, and I was baffled. I was like, go ahead, tell me who's the most vulnerable. Like, at least tell me. What do you mean by this population of the most vulnerable that you or the marginalized you're calling? And people would sometimes offer the word or throw the word class, but rarely the word caste or rarely the word women and caste. The intersection of them, wo to bhul hi jao. Like that's such a far-fetched idea for people to mention, like caste, class, and gender together. People are never mentioning that ever, and it is men from privileged upper caste communities sitting on those tables talking about climate solution. It's just weird because in this entire 2 hour conference, entire 2, 3 days of conference, when are you talking about me? Or when are you talking about my grandmother who's there in the farm, or my sisters who are my sister in the farm who are literally making food for you? I remember it was still June and they were literally harvesting wheat. And not everybody has tractor or the accessibility of a tractor to get all that wheat from that plant for you out, and that costs money, and a lot of people from the Dalit community still do not have access to those machines. But that doesn't mean that they don't work, doesn't mean that they won't do anything. I've seen women working from early morning 5 till the time there would be any source of light in the evening in the farm, tilling their own land or somebody else's land. We still know that not everybody in our country has land, you know, and it is such a sad thing to even think about the way caste exists in this country. It is so deeply ingrained. And so is patriarchy. Even Dalit women who go out in the farm to work, a lot of them have been called out, or why are you doing this? Or like, these women are bad women. All of those things that even you and I might hear sometimes. It's so common here. So I had a sort of anger that what are these people in conferences calling mostly vulnerable? And I'm like, let me show you what vulnerable people look like. They don't look like what you think they look like. So this very idea of always portraying, a disadvantaged community from a certain lens, a certain gaze, has been so pervasive in our media. If you talk about a Dalit woman or a Dalit farmer, you'd always see them with wrinkles on their faces and all frail. Or if you want to click heat, most people will go out and take a photo of a person on a rickshaw, or a rickshaw puller, and that also they would want to take a photo that is, sad looking and all of that. And because I've been around journalists who want photos like this, and I do not want photos like this. I want to challenge the very idea of an article that deals with Dalit people or marginalized people. It could be marginalized from any community. But that very gaze of looking at people like that really irks me. And so I think it was mostly like anger and finding no choice in representation or in media that I was like, oh, I'll have to do this. So, with mostly as far as my journalism journey is concerned, I think I've become the sort of journalist when I know, okay, something is not being done properly or not being covered at all, or I know no other journalist is doing this, is when I take up the task. If somebody else is doing it right, I'm more than happy. And I wish somebody else had done it before me so that I would be working on something else. Like, this is what I discuss often with my mother. My mother is a wonderful single parent. My mother also discussed that, she spent her entire life into getting a better life and thinking things will change, and here I am fighting for the same rights, trying to document, trying to do something in my own capacity, for it to become a little better. And we're like, when will this get better? When will this get better for a lot of our other sisters? And here I am trying to work on heat. And through this work, I'm trying to find all of those sub themes that follow a woman when she's working. And it is not just the one I'm photographing, but it's also me as a photographer. For example, when I'm going to villages and photographing, it is not easy for me as a single woman to just go to any random village in UP. Like, we all know what the crime rate is. We all know, like, it's not even about the data. You know, when you're on ground, you see how people, or men react to you, and you're worried about your gear as well. You're a lot. Just the process of reaching to a certain place is so hard. Like, this is what I've been thinking about these days. I'm like, if I were a man, I'd just go and click photos. But here I am thinking about, oh, I need to be safe also. I need to keep my gear in place also. So that is just how this project began for me. And ever since, like, this is for me at least more than a year. It's a long term project for me. So at least this year I have been photographing every month, and I've been photographing women from different areas, different places, and some things I found very common as well and different as well. One thing that really amazes me is the resilience of these women. Yeah, I think that becomes my core reason to photograph, because it gives me so much life. Seeing someone as, like, in the face of patriarchy, in the face of thousands of years of suppression, due to your caste and patriarchy and class, and still there is resilience, still there is like this need to do something. And I think that is my reason to photograph and to capture that also, like, instead of just the sad image of people.
Thank you so much, Bhumika. I mean, it's really such a deeply moving story of the origins of this project. And thank you for sharing it with us. I think this is such an incredible project that you're doing. So it's so important that you are helping challenge this and making us also think deeper in terms of what we see when we look at images. I'm so curious now to hear more about the project, because I understood that you started with a photograph of your grandmother, and if you could tell us a little bit more about the stories that have emerged in this.
So I went there and I stayed with people, and you'd realize you'd wake up with them and you'd sleep with them. The stories of the photographs that emerged are, these are mostly Dalit women, waking up early morning, sending their children really well dressed in the best school that is possible for them to send them into. And then, like, making food for them, everything, and then going to the farm, doing even the manual labor of first cleaning up the street. Like, at least one of the women that I interviewed is also a government employee where she goes and cleans. But that is not enough. It doesn't, it doesn't pay for your food. It doesn't pay for your children's fee, which is the systematic casteism that often goes invisible. And even though I know the woman personally, it took even her for my 2 or 3 visits to even reveal this to me. That she and her husband both go to work outside, do a cleaning job, because it's such a taboo in the society. It's such a shameful, quote unquote, shameful thing to do. One more thing that emerged out of the storytelling process was also, there's a photograph that I clicked where outside somebody's home, it's written Chamar, in Hindi. I don't know what to do with that photograph. I don't know what to make of something like this. I don't know if the documentation of this is enough. There's also a very beautiful sisterhood that I want to capture. For example, it's not just if it's my farm, I'll till it, or I'll hire some. No, it's like these women, specifically Dalit women, they help each other a lot in each other's farm work. And I wanted to capture that sisterhood moment. Also the fun moment of bringing lunch together, having lunch under the sun, taking a bit of rest, because it's just so much heat that your body cannot take it. You just cannot work the entire day. I think a lot of conferences, a lot of people, delegates need to go to these communities and see how they've found their own ways, their own methods to deal with heat. and they're also working. And I think this is one more thing that I wanted to highlight. It's not just, oh, look at this community and we need to help them. When you're not even there, when you're not even seeing it, how are you going to help? Question number one. And the other thing is that these communities in their own capacity are helping themselves. If you see, so most of us have a bottle, a steel bottle like this, where the water can remain cold or warm. But in India we have these Maaza bottles and these Coca-Cola bottles, and how we like most of us also fill water in that and keep it in the fridge. When most people don't have access to fridge or a 24/7 running fan, what do? And this is something that came out in the photo project. What do? Is like they have the bottle. They fill the water when it's a little cold. They fill it at that time, and then they cover the bottle with a piece of cloth. Like they sew the cloth onto the bottle. So they've made a covering of their own with cloth that can keep the water cold. Which is why I think visual medium might help. Is also if we redistribute even that particular image, it might help a lot of other people in keeping themselves safe. For example, we still don't know what are the health implications of extreme heat. It's a disaster. Like we're in the middle of disasters when that heat of more than 40 degrees Celsius, 113 Fahrenheit comes into place. In June, when I was doing this photo project, when I was photographing, the heat was so much that there was a news report which came out, and the Associated Press got it out. 117 people had died because of heat related issue. And this is when I'm in the middle of a farm and there are these women who are doing their work, not knowing today is unsafe to work or today is unsafe to go out. There are no early warning signs for them. We get early warning signs in our phones, for example, too much temperature today. But that information is not reaching to the people who are out and about on the ground. And the other thing during the process that came out, and the other things that I knew but I wanted to photograph, was also, for example, even the dressing. These are, I think, some photographs where women are, a lot of them are wearing sari because that is what you have to wear. And that is perhaps not the best cloth to wear when you're working. These are all informed by cultural or social, quote unquote, cultural and social ideas. So these are women who are wearing this already heavy cloth, carrying it. And when you cut wheat, it's so pinchy because it has those thorn sort of things that might get stuck in your hair or your clothes. This is summer, and summer of India, like summer in South Asia, and women are wearing winter gloves to protect them because they do not have adequate resources, or they've never been given, or they've never been told about any protective gears that they can wear or the other gloves that they should be wearing. There's no money for that. Specifically for a lot of people who come from a certain caste background, there is no money or help in that regard, or awareness. So you see women wearing winter gloves, and we don't even know what's the implication of that in heat at a time when the temperature is soaring above 40 degrees Celsius. And to protect themselves, they also cover themselves with chunni. You will see most women wearing an overshirt of their husbands or brothers or some other man in the family, so that the sari is intact or the suit is intact, and so that it becomes a more workable condition. And this is not something that has been told to them, or this shirt has not been given to them. It's probably a worn out shirt of one of the male counterparts that they have in home. The other very recent thing that I come across was also this varied gap of how women also carry their children to work. And it's very easy to say it in articles, men don't, but women carry children to work. But when you look at it or when you photograph it, it's very different. I have a shot of a woman named Lata. I have been photographing her. I don't know why, but she turns around when she's doing the work and she starts running in a particular direction. And I'm like, what happened It's incomprehensible to me. What happened? All of a sudden, this woman, her child's crying back in the juggi. And she can hear it, we can't, And she left everything and she got that child. And that child's in her arms and she's still doing it as if nothing's wrong. So we've also normalized and internalized so many things on so many levels that I think we need to stop and reconsider and look where we are and then find solutions. I think that's where the images come into play.
We'll be back after a break. Bhumika, thank you so much for sharing this. By hearing your description, I can see things, and I think you have a real gift in being able to do that. I wanted to also know a little bit about access to water, because here we have heat, but then there's also kind of issues relating to access of water and other resources. So I'd like to hear a bit more about what you found in that regard.
It's very weird for even me to be sitting here and talking about access to water, because a lot of these women who go to collect water for the entire home, they really do have to go far, and you don't know if the water is clean or not. You don't know if the water is fresh or not, because you don't own the tube well. But thanks to the centuries-old caste system, not everybody has access to water. There are a series of photographs that I've been clicking just about water, because that is we've so normalized an oppression that we don't realize that some communities do not really have access to water. For a matter of fact, even yesterday, when I went out to click photographs, there is a public well, and obviously it's owned by someone who has that privilege to have a public well. It is not owned by this community. And I go to and I go with the women I'm photographing to that well, and that is where they take bath as well. And that is the drinking water, that is where you take bath right there in the public place. A woman has to bathe herself. And then we talk about how is all this violence happening, because we've not given basic amenities to our citizens. We've not treated our citizens as citizens. That is the problem. So even for drinking water, for example, it's afternoon and not most people have running water. Most people I follow do not have running water. You either have to go to a distance to collect water and bring it. And because they have been doing it for decades, it's so normalized that nobody's ready to fix that bit also. And the water is also not clean. And I think one image has also changed. For me, is also now the matka, that earlier we used to have matka, has been replaced by a Bisleri bottle. I mean, there's a photograph of a woman who's walking with a big Bisleri bottle, like not even the 2 liter, like the 3 or 4 liter one on her head. I think at least some people are able to reuse it, unlike a lot of us who just throw it on one-time use. I think nobody ever acknowledges how so many people who we as society have marginalized are the ones who are actually doing the recycle, reusable bit. We never give them that due credit. No, in the blame game, it's always the poor that's the problem. It's always the oppressed that's the problem. Not realizing, these communities are using methods which are so much better than, at least they're reusing things more than we are.
Thank you so much, Bhumika. And really, I mean, what a fascinating project. And all we can do is really just wish you the best. And we're just waiting to see the outcome of all of this and follow up on how this emerges. I wanted to speak with you about one more project, which is an earlier project that you did in your journalism work. And the reason why we're bringing up this project is because that's also connected to heat. Of course, here you've spoken specifically about women in agriculture. You had written some pieces on Delhi's crematorium workers during the COVID-19 crisis. One thing that connects the two projects is that they both involved caste-based labor. They're underpaid with no protection, which involves heat, and especially in the case of crematorium workers, fire, and risks of different natures. And they form a bookend of sorts, from feeding the country on one end and keeping us alive to dealing with death. If you could speak a little bit more about this work that you had done during COVID-19.
So there's a visual documentation that I did. I did an 8-minute video story. So this is again one of the things that I was feeling is not being covered the way it should be. There's an erasure of, for example, caste identity. In the middle of COVID-19, I mean, there were reports about crematorium, but even when I was trying to read in between the lines, it really lacked many things. And so I decided that I want to go and see for myself. And here I was in a crematorium with burning bodies all around. And there I meet this wonderful, wonderful person called Govinda. Okay. So Govinda was actually in the first wave. He used to work as an ambulance driver. The first wave got over. He was asked to leave. Again, this is somebody from the Valmiki community I'm talking about, somebody from the Dalit community, that this person was only employed during the COVID-19 when there was such a need for people to do work that nobody else is going to do. For example, cleaning the blood from the floor. And this is when COVID is at its peak. Cleaning the blood, cleaning the body. And then here is this person who's laid off. And now he has no other way to feed his family, so he goes to a nearby crematorium. And because he's from a certain caste background, he's able to do that work. I don't know how many of us who were unemployed would go to work in a crematorium or would be allowed to work in a crematorium without any safety gears in the middle of COVID. And the crematorium again is a place that reflects caste for us. And because probably a lot of people go there in times of grief, we don't see it enough maybe. But if you don't go there in the time of grief, or even if you do, it's always the pundit you're talking to. It's always the priest, quote unquote, the priest who you're talking to, who you're doing the dealing with, who you're giving the money. I don't know how many people know how much money the person who's actually burying the dead or burning the dead is getting in the end of the day. And because I've been on crematorium grounds for a decent amount of time, I know that it takes hours for a body to burn. It's a skill, it's a task to break the skull in the end. It's not easy labor. And again, it's heat, it's intense heat, and there you are without anything to save you. And this has been happening since centuries. We've been burning bodies like this, and I don't know how many people we've lost in that process. Like a lot of people romanticize this idea of in the end when you're dead you burn the body. Like a lot of people from various countries I've seen romanticizing this idea after you're dead, what happens to you, but I don't find that romanticizing in any way. I am angered by how a lot of these people who are in the end burning the dead are dealing with it. And of course it is intense heat. And when I was interviewing Govinda, and he was telling me that he's only getting 50 rupees per body. That's not even $1. And even if you collect 200, I don't think that can feed your stomach. But there is so much layer of caste and class that here we are where we've normalized this, where we don't care about who it is in the crematoriums or who's that person, how much money is he making. I mean, we give our bit to the priest and we're like, I hope they get heaven, like whatever, So I think there's a need to also question that caste hierarchy or the things that are feeding it. So that's mostly it. And one more thing, when I was documenting this, I always make a point of also documenting the women in this story. So one might think that it's crematorium workers and mostly men are crematorium workers, and these are men from historically disadvantaged communities, and so people go and speak to them. I made a point to go to their home and speak to their wives, and there's so many other details that revealed to me. For example, she was like, when he comes back, smell of smoke. And when he comes back, there's a burning smell in his clothes. And if you meet Govinda, you will realize that if he's wearing shoes, his shoes are burnt because you're just so close to the fire that there is no way your shoes are not getting burnt. You can almost see feet because it's all the time burning. I mean, you have to also fix the fire with your leg or however. These are details that have been so normalized to Govinda himself that it was his wife who revealed this to me also because she's the one who's cleaning his clothes in the end of the day. So when he comes back and she's cleaning the clothes and the clothes reek of smoke from the dead. So these are details that I would have never got if I had not gone and spoken to his wife.
Thank you so much, Bhumika. Really, I've also been reading, and really such terrible adverse health effects, psychological effects, dealing with death the entire day, and in these kinds of quarters and in these kinds of contexts. And thank you for this work that you've done. It's really quite shocking, and I agree with you that this is not something that should be romanticized at all. I would love to talk to you all day, really. Unfortunately, I will have to come to this last question. And here I just wanted to kind of wrap it up, which is that we've touched upon some of the powerful work that you're doing, unpacking these identities in terms of how heat impacts people, bringing to the fore how caste-based labor, risk, heat, and climate change, how they converge. The presence of both the women in the fields and the workers at cremation sites. They're influenced by their caste through various historical, social, and economic conditions, and even government practices. What are your hopes and the hopes of the people you have spoken to in terms of change in the context of also a dangerous climate collapse and extreme heat? As you mentioned, these temperatures at some point, we will not be able to work in them. We will not be able to live in them. And please feel free to share any parting thoughts that you have and how you'll also be reaching out with your present work.
Right. So this is already a very heavy question. And as a storyteller, because I'm somebody who also wants to have like immediate effects of my work this lifetime, in this year, in next year or decade. So whenever if I do a project, each time either personally or otherwise, I try to make it a point, when the work goes out and it's mostly shared widely. When it goes out, if there is anybody who really does want to help from back channeling, whatever, I try to make a point that help reaches the person's story that I'm telling, to say the least. So, for example, after watching Govinda's story, there were some friends who reached out to me who were like, "We want to fund the education of their children." I was more than happy to make that connection and to like I know my stories don't really change anything. Maybe I'm making these photographs. Are they really going to do something? Or obviously these questions stay in your mind, but sometimes you're able to help. For example, I also did this project where I made this film about sex workers and their relationship with their children in GB Road. And they needed funds in that specific point in time. They needed money to survive, and a lot of people pulled in and sent them directly. And I think that was good. That was nice. I feel good when something happens after a story is published. But that might not happen all the time. Or specifically in regard to heat, is that there's very little conversation. Or there's a conversation in this picture. It's not just limited to India. It's each year there's COP. We discuss about, are we going to call it global warming or climate crisis or climate change? There's COP going to come, like it's happening most probably in the next 2 months, and there'll be people who'll be discussing heat and not really knowing what's happening in the global south or what's happening to certain specific communities, because the South Asian community or the Indian community is also represented by a certain few. And there's no denying that the certain few are people from privilege, are people from privileged caste and class backgrounds. That I don't know if anybody will be able to tell the stories of others who are not being directly present or represented. the world is also working very slow, is what I feel. Like, I'm in my early 20s, and like climate, it's just something that you can't do alone, which is why it also affects you, and which is why you do it in your own capacity. But we really need to buckle up. We, as in not just me as an individual or India or from the community, I think everybody in the world really needs to buckle up. All our politicians, everybody needs to buckle up, because this crisis is coming. And it's going to come on the face of you. It's going to hit you like COVID hit you. Unprepared, not having any idea of what it can do. Like, COVID came, and it came like a tsunami. We don't want heat to do that in the end of the day. We're not even looking at it like a disaster. It's a disaster. This year alone, the news report said in a month, 117 people died of heat-related issues. So it's already a disaster in coming. And I just want that by the time everybody else wakes up, I have a body of work which can help somebody, which can actually reveal, okay, there's more to it. And I'm glad that a lot of people, I think my community, like my identities also make me a much more informed person. Obviously, there's a burden of carrying this identity. It's a burden to be carrying the weight of your identities, because you don't want to. But the reality is that, at least for me, it does help me look in a much more nuanced way. That's the hope with this work. By the time when the world wakes up, I hope they have something to look for in reference, or so I say this all the time, even about love. Like, there's so much hate these days. There was so much hate, authoritarianism, so much hate that when I watch it films also, I'm like, there's even our cinema has gone dead. Like, there's no film about love or the lack of it. So I think that's what my photographs are going to do. Either they'll help, people or policymakers who might want help with this work, or they'll just reveal the lack of this generation, like the lack of people who were in power that time who just didn't care. And we kept losing people to heat, kept losing people to death. Maybe that's what it's going to be. So,
Bhumika, all I can say is really it's been such a moving conversation. It's been an honor to talk to you. You're very, very inspirational to me, and I'm sure even to Menaka and to Vinu who have heard you today. We wish you all the best, really, with everything going forward. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that we will continue to partner and work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks to Bhumika Saraswati for sharing her thoughts with us. The Subverse is the broadcast of Dark and Light, a digital space that chronicles the times we live in and reimagines futures with a focus on science, nature, social justice, and culture. You can follow us on Instagram at Dark and Light Zine. If you like the show, please tell a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. The Subverse is produced for us by Vaka Media. So long, and thanks for listening.